Hello, good afternoon. It is your host, Emmanuel Isaiah Smith, and today's date is Wednesday, October 8th, 2025. The time is 2 p.m. and I am in Miami, Florida. The topic of today's lecture is the historical record. And before I get into the historical record and how it ties into clandestine gang stalking campaigns, I would like to say a word about the rip-off industry in clandestine gang stalking. And mind you, I typically do these lectures outside, and I may have to, in various intervals, raise or project my voice to drown out the background noise. So adjust your volume accordingly. So, one thing that enterprising, targeted individuals will experience regularly and ever so often is intellectual property theft and various rip-off techniques imposed upon him or her by gang stalkers, undercover operatives, and liaisons alike. What is this? What is the remedy? Why does it exist? It exists for the same reasons that workplace mobbing exists. And that is to reduce the targeted individual's chance of attaining success or earning a living. In the workplace mobbing mechanism, which is both a hallmark and a cornerstone of clandestine gang stalking, a targeted person is routinely mobbed by a combination of co-workers and supervisors in such a way that may or may not cause that targeted person to either quit the company, become fired, or act in a way that is unseemly in retaliation and frustration. All three scenarios are desirable for a targeted individual in their gang stalking campaign because it causes the targeted person to have to start over again at a new company rather than earn a living at their present company, potentially climbing the corporate ladder, establishing themselves as tax-paying citizens, and moving towards the path to retirement. Keeping the targeted individual in economic dire straits is a key strategic mechanism in clandestine gang stalking. The same is true for the rip-off industry, in which targeted persons' creative ideas are routinely ripped off by clandestine gang stalkers from many different angles using many different tactics. Now, one of the more intricate methods of accomplishing this intellectual property emulation is present in Project Echelon. Project Echelon is a national security apparatus, auxiliary, and component in which targeted persons' ideas and even some non-targeted persons' ideas are electronically copied by third parties using various hacking technologies so as to copy ideas, sometimes rip off entire ideas, and either use their ideas themselves to make a profit or sell the ideas to other third parties so they can make a profit, all to the detriment of the targeted person, because the targeted person's ideas may or may not flood the market before the targeted person can make their idea commercially available. I, for one, know for a fact that my tablet is routinely hacked by deleterious third parties in an attempt not only to spy on my electronic habits, but to also rip off ideas. Now, I design all of my videos myself, either from scratch or using templates that I myself designed. When I design new videos and the graphic designs for those videos, my tablet is hacked by third parties who wish to, in various capacities, copy my ideas or use a third-party illegal hacking mechanism to watch me work so they can copy the way in which I work, so they themselves can use the idea to benefit themselves personally or economically. I suspect as well I have certain persons that hack my tablet as I'm doing a design to watch me do it in real time because they admire my work. But over and above that, there are persons that know of my work online and see my designs and covet those designs, and they hack my tablet in real time for malicious reasons. To those persons I say, I'm sorry that your parents gave birth to you. I'd rather you had been aborted before reaching this realm called Earth, outside of your mother's nurture. That way, I would not have to deal with you and your clandestine thuggery on a daily basis, and neither would my significant other, Lori. So, having said that, let's get into the historical record. Ladies and gentlemen, governmental matters of all shapes, sizes, and colors and levels of importance are routinely, dutifully, and legally documented in databases for the record. There isn't a single historical occurrence that has ever occurred in the 250-year history of the United States that has not been documented for the record. And the reason that historical matters are documented for the record is so that present generations and future generations can refer to, examine, and analyze those records for the continued progression of their respected countries. Now, we live in a world of digitization. We live in a world of electronic records. We live in a world of constant record keeping, bookkeeping, data entry, and accounting. And that's at the federal, state, and local levels, as well as in the business sector, and in the religious sector, and in the the judicial sector. Now, whether or not these records can or cannot be falsified is a matter of the confidentiality of the record. Most easily identifiable records can be falsified. And if unscrupulous persons get their hands on records, those records can be falsified. Now, gang stalking is one of those governmental conundrums that's going to have to be recorded by the targeted persons themselves and by interested governmental parties, because there is no official, publicly observable data about its existence. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is by design. This program was never supposed to be discovered, and the gang stalking mechanism, ever how deleterious it is, ever how violent it is, ever how pestering and annoying it is, and ever how thuggish it is, it was meant to be kept under wraps so that various segments of the population could benefit from it, whether they're stealing someone's intellectual property with a project like Echelon, or whether they're simply pestering somebody to cope with the stresses of their own life, particularly using an inbred, ill-conceived, weaselly, and snaky covert signaling mechanism in which liaisons point stalkers to targets, stalkers point stalkers to targets, and descend upon them like a pack of wild vultures with the intent of harming or otherwise disrupting that targeted person's trajectory through time and space. Now, I've not heard any debates on the Senate floor about gang stalking, and the reason is because this program might be top secret. It might be a top secret it might be a top secret intelligence, military, and semi-law enforcement mechanism aimed at instigating social change in ways that are deemed appropriate and necessary by various components of the federal establishment. Furthermore, this program has the ability, particularly given its auspices, its operation, and its capacity to spread like a virus among the population. This program has the ability to embarrass the United States and challenge its credentials as a superpower as a democracy and as a constitutional republic. It is unbecoming of any democracy to implement a program that seeks to undermine the constitutional values of inalienable rights, individual sovereignty, life, liberty, and happiness, and no taxation without representation. And the reason I include no taxation without representation into this conundrum is because targeted persons are taxed just like non-targeted persons are taxed. And because the citizenship of targeted persons has been extrajudicially stripped from them in favor of this military-industrial driven gang stalking conundrum, that these targeted persons are not being represented. If you strip me of my civil liberties, if you strip me of my civil rights, if you strip me of my constitutional rights, if you strip me of my sovereignty as a United States citizen, if you trample my inalienable rights, you cannot legally tax me. You cannot tax me under the political philosophy that is present in the United States Constitution. And the reason being is because my citizenship has been erased. That means I am not being represented by any of the elected officials at the federal level. And therefore, I cannot be taxed because I am not being represented as a non-U.S. citizen, as a citizen who has less rights than any illegal alien that has ever set foot into this country. Now, there will be order in this country. There will be order among the populace. This clandestine gang stalking mechanism is equally as atrocious, equally as pandering, equally as useless, equally as hostile, and equally as politically subversive as any program that Adolf Hitler, the Reich Chancellor of Nazi-era Germany, or Joseph Stalin, the president of Soviet Russia, ever implemented. And as with any political matter, and mind you, I think Germany and Russia are gorgeous countries, and I think their governments operate well, given the historical conundrums that it's faced, and given its population and its geographic region. But despite me seeing these countries as amazing, the Hitler and Stalin regimes did some things in their day that are looked at as atrocious in today's world. Now, there are other regimes, kingdoms, and empires throughout history that today's human population, at least most of them, look at as atrocious. Now, despite any atrocity that's ever been committed by any government throughout history, there will always be people to support the atrocious behavior. There are people that believe that Adolf Hitler was correct and systematically and using his governmental authority to systematically destroy the Jewish population, particularly that of Germany and Poland. And some people believe that Joseph Stalin was correct in opening gulags and throwing political dissidents inside with the violent criminals. There are people that believe that Vlad the Impaler, King of Romania, was correct in systematically impaling his enemies or having them impaled by an executioner. There are people that believe that Idi Amin, the former president of Uganda, was right to expel all the East Indians from the country. There are people that believe that the Roman Emperor Nero was correct in finding elaborate and spectacular ways of executing Christians in public. And so forth and so on. There are always going to be people who look at human rights matters on the side of the person. And there will always be people that look at human rights matters on the side of the perpetrator of the atrocity or the perceived atrocity. And that's simply human nature. When gang stalking's auspices are made public and are examined in government records as a legitimate program that actually existed to disrupt the lives of some and enhance the lives of others, no doubt there will be people who look at this historical matter on the side of the targeted persons, and there will be people who look at this historical matter on the side of those who perpetrate the gang stalking mechanism upon society. Ladies and gentlemen, it is clandestine gang stalking in an ever-changing world. Every criminal case that has occurred, particularly over, we'll say, the last 50 years, has been documented in electronic files. They're readily searchable and can be researched for the learning of the public and for the learning of all those employed by the American judicial system. Now, I say the 1970s because I believe that's when the more stringent record-keeping mechanisms concerning criminal and civil matters began. Before that, legal records were kept and documented, but not nearly to the degree that they were starting in the 1970s. And as the 80s, 90s, and 2000s rolled around, we saw an increase in electronic records, which further enhanced the record-keeping capacity of the American judicial system, and that's at the federal, state, and local levels. Now, ladies and gentlemen, stringent records are kept, mind you, on gang stalking and its components, but these records are kept by people like myself. There are very few people in the United States there are a number of people who are employed by the United States governmental mechanism that have no clue of gang stalking or how it works. Some of them may even participate in it not knowing that it's clandestine gang stalking. Now, ultimately, and rightfully so, clandestine gang stalking is going to have to be declassified. It's obviously top secret. That's why no one's had access to it. But thanks to companies like WikiLeaks, which is under stringent federal controls right now, and other benevolent hackers, the kind that release government information to the public that it thinks the public needs to know, gang stalking and its auspices are available for public view online. See, back in the 1960s when the FBI was running Project COINTELPRO, Operation Hoodwink, which is a program that you can go to the FBI.gov's own website and observe, particularly its documents, there weren't enough digitized records or computer technology for people to go in and hack the FBI servers concerning this information. If the FBI Operation COINTELPRO, Operation Hoodwink, were to have been created tonight, information about it will have leaked the next day. There are benevolent hackers that put deleterious government information into the public sphere. Looking back on it all these years later, I now realize that there was a symbol of what you might refer to as benevolent hackers that persisted throughout the internet. This symbol included a masked figure who wore the mask from that movie Vendetta, starring Natalie Portman. And this masked figure, who wore a black garb, was considered the face of benevolent hacking. If the United States federal government, man, what the hell? There ain't no fucking... Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, I just had a stalker nearly run me over with a bike. And they do that from time to time. These clownish stalkers, they'll take a signal towards me as I'm recording a lecture. So anyhow, this masked figure became a symbol of that. That if a country documents and institutes protocols that are damaging or deleterious to American society or to the sovereignty of American citizens, then that information, that digitized information, should be made public so that the general public can be aware of the impending threat to their personal sovereignty. Gang stalking is one such digitized record. I believe it started off top secret, and benevolent hackers, some of which may have worked for the federal government itself, became aware of the program and leaked its information. And I came across some of that leaked information in 2016, although I suspect that leaked information was available to the general public for observation as early as 2011. I, for one, am very happy that information of and relating to clandestine gang stalking was leaked onto the internet when it was. I happened upon this electronic information in 2016 and realized that it was immediately and actionably applicable to my personal experiences with clandestine gang stalking. And the more I learned about clandestine gang stalking, and the more I was able to compare it to various activities that existed in this country in the 1860s via domestic terrorist groups, and in the 1960s via the FBI's COINTELPRO Operation Hoodwink program, which, mind you, was initially aimed at disrupting the lives of the members of the Black Panther Party, the Ku Klux Klan, and the American Communist Party. These persons were the subjects of the community disruption mechanisms that were present in COINTELPRO Operation Hoodwink, although in clandestine gang stalking, similar disruption mechanisms are used against obviously the descendants of people who may have joined these groups, but it could also be a disruption against the lives of people who have no affiliation with the above named groups at all. For example, me personally, I've had no personal affiliation with the Black Panther Party, the Ku Klux Klan, or the American Communist Party, but my father may have been a Black Panther at some point in his life, particularly in the 60s or 70s. I learned this about 7 years ago. And I also learned that a number of my paternal relatives may have been involved in a kidnapping plot against a senator back in the state of Michigan in the 1970s. So I imagine that being the son of my father and being a relative of the persons involved in that plot, that it's possible that I've always had an eye on me as a relative of the persons that were involved or rumored, or rather accused of being involved in these matters. But ultimately, you got to make this stuff known and available to the American populace. I got two operatives approaching. Probably just to do some routine disruption or annoyance. Hopefully they won't pass me without incident, which is rare for operatives. There's always some pestering tactic that has to be perpetrated by these persons, and that's why they send them by so close. They send them by close. They have to come within 3 to 10 feet of the target, even though their only objective is to watch. Why they need to come that close to a person that they're just watching, I have no identifiable concept of why they have to come so close. The only thing I could think of is by coming in close range, like they always do, they have the opportunity, an easier opportunity, to either instigate some sort of a problem, spread some kind of an airborne bacterial disease to the target, or simply get in the target's way and pester them in such a way that would injure that target's plans for the day. Those are the only 3 reasons I can think of. Now, given the trajectory of clandestine gang stalking and its capacity to target the relatives of persons who may have at one time been subject to investigation by state or federal authorities, it leads one to come to the realization that the biblical precept of the sins of one generation carrying on to another generation are in full effect in the United States federal mechanism. And why is that? Well, it's because the United States has an image problem. Okay, it's always been looked at as sort of this scrappy big shot that constantly needs to go around the world picking scuffles with other countries and or lecturing them on how they need to be more like the United States. There are some countries who remain allied with the United States. There are some countries that have distanced themselves from the United States. There are some countries that consider themselves opponents of the United States because of that image. But despite that image, the United States probably a little less these days than in times past, calls itself a Christian nation. And that's because apparently most of the people in the United States that claim a religion claim to be Christians. Furthermore, there are more Christian churches in the United States than there are any other religious congregation. And one of the biblical precepts that we see, particularly in the laws of Moses, which, if I'm not mistaken, we see from the books of Exodus to Deuteronomy in the Old Testament of the Holy Bible, we see instances of generational curse being pronounced on the progeny of what Moses might describe to as wayward Israelites. So if a man got caught breaking one of the 10 commandments, according to Moses' law, and according to many of the laws that are present in the Old Testament, mind you, the entire law of Moses goes beyond the 10 commandments. The entire law of Moses is 613 commandments that he gives the children of Israel by inspiration of God from the books of Exodus to Deuteronomy. So when you look at the 10 commandments by themselves, you're looking at a very, very small fraction of the overall story. And a lot of the Mosaic laws are present in U.S. law. And as a matter of fact, Moses was the first Supreme Court justice. And we see where he had as they reached the promised land from slavery in Egypt, Moses set up a high court in which there was a local court that managed the, you could call it a circuit court or something to that effect, that handled minor matters that arised among the children of Israel. And then there was a middle court, you may call it a court of appeals, that handled escalated matters. And then Moses and his advisors sat on the highest court, which you might refer to as a Supreme Court, or the highest court that governed the most imminent matters that came before him, or rather that came before the court, that required his experience, wisdom, judgment, and proximity to Yahweh to handle. The United States judicial system is indeed based upon this judicial structure. Okay? Biblical precepts are indeed ingrained into the very U.S. legal code. So, by proxy, there's no divorcing the Judeo-Christian religion from the United States political process, its judicial process, or its governmental process. The two are very tightly intertwined. So, with respect to this image problem that the United States has, it wants to be a Christian country, but at the same time, it wants to implement programs like clandestine gang stalking, which are essentially organized it's basically the organized dismantling of a person's trajectory through this mortal world. Some might call it a dispensation. particularly those people who believe in both a mortal and a spiritual existence. You might call it the dismantling of a person's trajectory through this dispensation. So my question is this. Okay, so given the intensified record-keeping requirements and data keeping protocols that are present in the United States, how can you say, particularly given the capacity for the United States to bill itself as a Christian nation, how do you justify using your governmental capacity and your legislative capacity to implement a program that bills the taxpayer to the tune of $2 trillion a year? Okay, that's the military-industrial budget. And a piece of that is used for clandestine gang stalking operations. To routinely dismantle a citizen's trajectory through time and space using a combination of deputized and semi-deputized United States citizens in a destructive semi-militaristic role. You cannot justify it. You would not justify it. You would not convince me or any of the founding fathers of this country that such a program is needed or constitutional. If you're going to use this intensive a espionage mission in United States borders against persons residing in the United States, you have to use it on credible threats to national sovereignty. You don't use this program on a guy trying to earn a bachelor's degree. You don't use this program on someone who is attempting to settle in to a religious institution. You don't use this program on a person who is pursuing an occupation. You don't use this program on a person who is pursuing entrepreneurial goals, which will, in turn, provide for a more stable and prosperous existence for that sovereign citizen. You don't use this program on women who are not as able to defend themselves against the auspices that are present in clandestine gang stalking as is presented. You don't use this program on children who are not able to properly defend themselves against the various auspices of this clandestine operation, particularly the ones that could cause them physical or psychological harm. The Supreme Court of the United States needs to issue a statement within 24 hours of this broadcast declaring any such operation either to be in existence or not in existence. If it is in existence, the Supreme Court of the United States needs to make a ruling on why it's constitutional. If they think it's not in existence, then they're going to have to get together with Congress and find an identifiable way to understand why so many people are saying that they have experienced this program and are experiencing it on a daily basis. Okay? This is the 24-hour challenge I'm issuing. It's a political challenge. It's a governmental challenge. It's an administrative challenge. I challenge the United States Supreme Court to answer this video within 24 hours, given a reason. And I make that challenge as a sovereign United States citizen, as someone who's lived in this country my entire life, and as someone who has had the trajectory of my personal success, rights, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness routinely and systematically disrupted by a government protocol that has not presented itself to the United States populace via Senate floor debates or via any mechanism whatsoever outside of leaked documents concerning its existence and the personal testimony of targeted persons like myself who assert its existence, I issue a 24-hour challenge to the United States Supreme Court. Get your people together, get with Congress, gather data, gather records, let the American people know in a televised special to be broadcast on all the local networks. Have the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Justice John Roberts, sit in front of a camera. Let the other 8 justices be present. Give us some semblance as to what it is that people are experiencing and what their experiences have had to gain, what they've had to gain from this. Because all I'm seeing is loss. I don't think targeted individuals have anything to gain from what they're experiencing. Tell us what we have to gain from this. That's the 24-hour challenge, ladies and gentlemen. I hope the Supreme Court of the United States will take me up on it. I'm going to have this video up at some point tomorrow evening. So the 24-hour challenge starts tomorrow, Thursday, at approximately 3 p.m. So that means I hope that Friday, October 10th, by approximately 3 p.m., that the Supreme Court of the United States will take me up on this challenge. Step up to the plate, answer the call. Thank you for listening.